Well, good evening, this is Hound Dog Steve wishing you a very pleasant evening and welcome back to my channel. This evening I would like to talk about what I think is a very dangerous style of writing. It is by a woman called Miranda Devine, who is an op-ed writer, and I think, well, as you'll see by this headline, and it says opinion, and I think that is the key word here. And why I think this kind of writing is very dangerous is on two levels. On the surface level, essentially it is a red herring. There is no connection between smoking pot and mass shootings, and this is the assertion made in the article. Now you have to remember that my generation basically grew up with pot. It was common when I was a teenager. Most of us tried pot at one time or another. And I think that most of us, if we think back to those days, those heady days, you know, if I went into a party and I saw people drinking hard liquor, you know what, I'm out of there. There is nothing more troubling than hard liquor consumption. It leads to problems. There was always a fight, there was things getting broken, people getting hurt because they fell, they lost control of themselves. If you smell pot being smoked at a party, guess what? The only fight you're going to see is over a bowl of chips. Other than that, you're going to see people listening to music, having conversations, and generally getting along with each other. It is probably the most mellow drug that I've ever come across in my life, and trust me, I lived in Amsterdam for 2 years, and now that was 40 years ago. And 2 years prior to my arrival in Amsterdam, pot had been legalized. So there is 42 years of legalization experience, and while Amsterdam and Holland haven't degenerated into an absolute hellhole, and of course, actually, well, I'll show you in a minute, but they are 15th from the top of the world's safest countries to live in. But why this? The real reason that this is so dangerous, because it distracts from the real connection to drugs that mass shootings have, and that is with antipsychotic, psychotropic, antidepressant, ADD drugs. These have all been connected. And now there were 484 drugs that fell into this category, and they singled out 31 drugs that had extremely harmful side effects, with murderous thoughts, self-harming thoughts, this kind of stuff, suicidal thoughts. So there is definitely a link between these drugs made by Big Pharma, and you have to remember that Big Pharma also make all kinds of drugs that have all kinds of nasty side effects, not the least of which is addiction. Oxycontin comes to mind, Percocet, Percodan, fentanyl. These are very dangerous chemical dependence-inducing drugs. So now when we go through the history of mass shooters, especially most recently in the USA, something like 80 or 90% of these young, usually men, had some kind of mental condition, and they were taking some kind of antidepressant or antipsychotic medication. And the strangest thing is that never makes it into the media. You might see it in some scientific journals and this kind of stuff. You never see it as front page news, and it absolutely should be. This is absolutely shocking. The Oxycontin and crystal meth addiction that is sweeping the United States of America and to a certain degree Canada is absolutely staggering. And these are all manufactured or chemical type drugs, and what I mean by chemical is synthesized drugs, whereas marijuana is a natural product that has been used literally for thousands and thousands of years. There are ancient references to sativa, hemp, and marijuana being used in cures and tinctures all over the place. I have a 1904 medical dictionary, and it talks about using sativa for appetite problems, for sleeping problems, for depression, this kind of stuff. So we really have got a lot of experience with this drug, And as I say, there are really no documented cases of people going out of control. And of course, as I say, it was prescribed by doctors back in the 1900s, 1800s. And but of course, I mean, you know, so was laudanum and radium and all of these kind of things. So I guess we have to take that with a grain of salt. But as I say, as far as I know, there is no recorded cases of any mass outbreaks of violence due to the use of pot. Okay, so let's flip over to a couple of articles that I found here, and I'll come back and we'll do a quick wrap up. Okie dokie, here we go. Okay, New York Post, Miranda Devine. The link between pot and mass shootings may be closer than we think. You can't walk through the streets of Manhattan these days without smelling weed. Even as evidence mounts of the health problems associated with marijuana, New York has insisted on joining other greedy states scrambling to legalize this deceptively dangerous drug. It makes no sense at a time when American youth is suffering from an unprecedented mental health crisis. And in all honesty, we cannot rule out a connection between increasing marijuana use, mental illness, and the recent spate of mass shootings by disturbed young males. Just last year, the Parents Opposed to Pot lobby group tried to sound the alarm on the link between marijuana and mass shootings, compiling a list of mass killers it claimed were heavy users. Now, the big word here is claimed were heavy users of marijuana from a young age. Now, how would you find out that information? I think that would be kind of difficult, actually, to come up with that kind of information. And, of course, because the use of marijuana is ubiquitous, it's kind of hard to prove there's really any connection at all, because there's lots of young people, as we've seen in the Netherlands or Holland, where they have no mass shootings and a high use of marijuana. Anyway, the interesting point is here that she has made this definite link between the word marijuana and drug. So she definitely ties in some very strange facts all together to point the finger at marijuana. And here we know from a 2018 FBI report that 40% of active shooters in the US between 2008 and 2013 had been diagnosed with a mental illness before the attack, and 70% had mental health stressors or mental health concerning behaviors, which would kind of support the idea that they were on some kind of antipsychotic or antidepressant. So for anyone actually interested in preventing future such massacres, the so-called red flag legislation Trump is advocating to deny people with mental illness access to firearms is the most logical measure and the one most likely to be embraced by both sides of politics. But it should also apply to marijuana use, seeing as the two go hand in hand. And of course she's making these connections that are not substantiated. You can't address the youth mental health crisis without considering the effect of rising teen marijuana use. Among American teenagers, the drug's daily use has become as or more popular than daily cigarette smoking, according to the National Institute of Health's 2017 Monitoring the Future study. We successfully demonize cigarettes while new laws send kids the message that marijuana is harmless. This is from Psychology Today. Psychiatric drugs and violence. A review of FDA data finds a link. Antidepressants near top of drugs associated with violence. There has been an enduring controversy over whether psychiatric medications can trigger violent actions towards others. A review of the FDA's Adverse Event Reporting System by Thomas Moore, Joseph Glenn Mullen and Kurt Furberg, which was published by PLOS ONE on December 15th, found that such adverse events are indeed associated with antidepressants and several other types of psychotropic medications. To do their study, Moore and his collaborators extracted all serious events reported from the FDA's database from 2004 through September 2009, and then identified 484 drugs that had triggered at least 200 case reports of serious adverse events of any type during that 69-month period. Then they investigated to see if any of these 484 drugs had a disproportionate association with violence. They identified 31 such drugs out of the 484 that met this criteria. The 31 suspect drugs accounted for 1,527 of the 1,937 case reports of violence towards others in the FDA database for that 69-month period. The drugs in that list of the 31 included varenicline, an aid to smoking cessation, 11 antidepressants, 6 hypnotic sedatives, and 3 drugs for attention deficit hyperactive disorder. Antidepressants were responsible for 572 case reports of violence towards others, the 3 ADHD drugs for 108, and the hypnotic sedatives for 97. Of the 1,937 total case reports of violence towards others, there were 387 cases of homicide, 404 physical assaults, 27 cases of physical abuse, and 896 reports of homicidal ideation, and 223 cases of violence-related symptoms. Okay, this from the Huffington Post. Marijuana use linked with lower risk of domestic violence among married couples, study finds. Past research has indicated that couples who abuse substances are at a greater risk for divorce, in part because substance abuse often leads to an increase in domestic violence. However, new research has found that when it comes to marijuana use, the opposite might be true. Frequent use of marijuana by couples is associated with less partner violence. Researchers from Yale University, University of Buffalo, and Rutgers recruited 634 couples from 1996 to 1999 while they were applying for marriage licenses in New York State. After an initial interview, the researchers followed the couples over the course of 9 years using mail-in surveys to measure the effects of marijuana use on intimate partner violence. And from Safe Around, World's Safest Countries. 1 Iceland, 2 Denmark, 3 New Zealand, Austria, Singapore, Finland, Canada. Number 7, look at that. Switzerland, Norway, Czech Republic, Slovenia. 12 Australia, 13 Germany, 14 South Korea, 15 the Netherlands. And of course right down here at 49 United States of America. So the Netherlands didn't fall apart just because they legalized pot, and they've had no mass shootings since that has happened. And as you see, top 15 are the world's safest countries. Now, what I find most dangerous about this op-ed that I don't like is that really she states no studies, no factual evidence. This is all her opinion as far as I can see, and yet it talks as if there are facts to support what she's saying. And in any good piece that states these kind of facts, you must have some kind of reference at the bottom which shows where you got all of this information from and the veracity of the information that you're purporting. But there's some very dangerous connections. The way she uses the word drugs, which of course is true because the antipsychotics are drugs, but the inference, because of the title of the piece, is that the drug she's talking about is marijuana. And so she's raking in all of these studies, as I showed you a couple of studies about antipsychotics and their connection to violence, and she is crossing over those studies and giving the impression that those studies were about the drug cannabis. Okay, so this is very misleading, and as I say, it completely draws attention away from the fact that Big Pharma are pushing out drugs, giving them to all kinds of young people for conditions that really should be treated in a much more natural way, maybe through counseling, this kind of stuff, and also the underlying conditions that create the hopelessness that we're seeing in our children. And I think the hopelessness that we are seeing is coming from the fact that really society now has not a clear direction. There is no clear path forward as to where we're going. What are we trying to achieve? Are we trying to colonize space? Are we trying to create a world that is controlled by AI that has nothing to do with human beings? Why would you want to be involved in that? Everything we see today is actually taking away from the whole idea of humanness. AI is faster than human beings can think or work at, but of course they do lack that essential human quality in that they are pretty two-dimensional. But I mean, if you imagine a young person growing up today, what have they got to hope for? That they're going to be replaced by a machine? When I was growing up, I was led to believe that the world was my oyster and that humanity was the reason for all of the technology, and that technology was going to serve us. But now somehow in the last 30 or 40 years or so, has got twisted around into we are the slaves of technology. Are we surprised that this is causing hopelessness in our children? It seems to be that they now have to have endless qualifications. They come out of school being over their heads in debt. All of these things, you know, how can you manage to think about raising a family when you've got $60,000 to $120,000 in educational debt that you can't lose, especially in the States? You have to pay that off. This is like having a mortgage at the age of 21 or 22 of $120,000. So this is a pretty daunting world for young people to be growing up in, and no wonder those who are on the edge of the society anyways, no wonder those who are more sensitive to these kind of things and more perceptive should go off the deep end. So I think maybe we should look at the root causes, and instead of writing op-eds like this which cast dangerous dispersions on what I think is a relatively harmless drug, and draw your attention away from those drugs which are the real dangerous drugs in our society. Okay, well, if you enjoyed this video, please like, comment and subscribe below, and in the meantime, this is Hound Dog Steve signing off, wishing you a very pleasant evening, and we'll talk to you very, very shortly. See you now. Bye.